All right, what is up, guys? This is Joseph back with the Utah Utes Football Digest, and this is going to be another segment of the Big 12 Breakdown. Today, we are talking about quarterback rankings. We are going to rank all the quarterbacks in the Big 12 from 1 through 16, starting with number 16. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm going to break it down by a bunch of different metrics: yards, TDs, interceptions, TD to interception ratio, QBR. We're going to dive into a ton of it, and those are all kind of the factors. We'll talk about rushing yards and won't play as big of a factor, but if they are significant, they will play a role. But we'll talk about QBR. We'll talk about their 2023 performance, 2022 performance, if there is one and not the other. This should be pretty in-depth, guys, and I think I'll give you, if you feel like you're a little lost in the new Big 12 landscape and you're looking for someone to kind of guide you into what to look for in each team next year and what the QB play will look like, hopefully this video will give you a little bit of insight on that. Before we dive in, guys, please make sure you smash the like button. That'll help get this video out to more Big 12 fans. Also, comment down below as we go through the video. I want to know your number 16 to number 1, what we agree on, what we don't agree on, and why. I want to hear it. Also, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, we put out a ton of Utah Utes football content, a ton of Big 12 content, whatever you're into, Big 12 related, you should get at least some of it here. And if you're a Utah Utes fan, this is a place to be. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in and let's talk Big 12 quarterback rankings. All right, guys, and let's go ahead and dive in. We are going to rank every Big 12 quarterback all the way from 16 down to number 1. I am also going to break them down into tiers just to give you guys an idea of where I do think there are jumps in quality, because I do think there are clear, distinct tiers. I'm going to do a tier 3, a tier 2, and a tier 1. So as we dive in, just know that does mean something, which tier they're in, even if they're really close in ranking. If they're in different tiers, that means I feel differently about them. Okay, and we're going to start with number 16. That's Retzlaff from BYU. And I know this is a Utah channel, and a lot of people are going to say, yeah, well, does it really count? You have BYU number 16. All Utah fans hate BYU. I am not a huge fan of BYU, but I would say take a look at his numbers here. He has no 2022 sample size. And in 2023, his TD to interception ratio was a 1. So he threw just as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. And he had 4 games where he got enough playing time to do what I would call, like start a game. It's like you're getting at least like more than 2 quarters of a game. That's basically like you got enough of a sample size for me to judge you on. And in those 4 games, he averaged 162 passing yards per game. And on the season, he averaged a 40.6 QBR. 40.6 QBR, guys, is really, really bad. I actually feel pretty confident in saying Retzlaff is clearly the worst quarterback here. I almost feel like there should be a tier 4 in this situation, not trying to make the guy feel bad. And he could have a wonderful 2024 year. Just from what we've seen so far, I think it's pretty justified. To give you an idea, a 40.6 is clearly the worst season any Big 12 quarterback has had by a decent margin. And then 116 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns for Retzlaff, which is pretty solid, right? Let's take that into account. But even with that, I don't think that moves the needle enough to get him out of that 16th spot. So that is Retzlaff, number 16th quarterback and the first quarterback in our tier 3 and he's from BYU. All right, guys. And the next player in tier 3, so this will be number 15 player in the total rankings, but he is the next player coming up in tier 3. And that is going to be Leavitt from Arizona State. Leavitt went 2 touchdowns for 2 picks last year when he was at Michigan State. So playing in the Big Ten was solid competition, but 2 touchdowns for 2 picks. That's a ratio touchdown to interception of 1, just like Retzlaff. And in total, he had 139 yards. He started 0 actual games. None of his games were enough of a sample size for us to look at. But in the small sample he had on that 139 yards, he did have a QBR of 83, which is really, really good. He also had 67 rushing yards, 0 rushing touchdowns. With him super unproven, very little sample size, transferring out after 1 year at Michigan State. I think I expect him to be better than Retzlaff, but it would be very difficult for me to project him to be better than anyone else in the Big 12 at this moment. So that's Sam Leavitt out of Arizona State. Seems like he could be something, but very, very unproven, very little, sample size right now. So that's the second quarterback in tier 3, number 15, Leavitt from Arizona State. All right, guys. And as we move into number 14, I think this will be the first one that is quite controversial. So, and I think the next one might be controversial as well. It is going to be Morton from Texas Tech. And I can see a lot of people being a little surprised by this, but let me break it down for you. So again, this is tier 3 still. This is number 14 in the rankings, Morton from Texas Tech. Now, this guy actually has 2 years of like decent starting experience. So in 2022, 7 touchdowns to 6 picks. So a little better of a ratio than the 2 guys listed prior to him. Total of 1,117 yards. Started and actually got good playing time in 5 games that year, averaged 223 yards per game, but had a QBR of 56.4, 79 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. And QBR is such an important number, guys. It's not the whole story, but it is probably one of the most important things to look at. And I think when you look at QBR and you think Morton had a 56.4, the ratio is not great. We're talking about a guy that's playing a lot of dink and dunk football, right? We're talking a lot of dink and dunk, a lot of just not really capitalizing on situations given to you. And I think when you take that into account, you can't rank him much higher than that. And then he follows it up in 2023 with 15 touchdowns for 8 interceptions. So a significantly better TD to INT ratio at 1.9. But this next one is where it gets super unimpressive. He had 1,754 yards in 10 starting games, averaging 175 yards per game passing the ball. And then on that season, the QBR gets even worse at a 54.1 with 3 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. So I think what you're seeing with Morton is a guy that seems to be holding the offense back more than he is making plays to move it forward. He's leaving a lot on the table and he's not making a lot of plays. So I think you're going to see another lackluster season from him, and he doesn't seem to be the guy based on these numbers for Texas Tech. Who knows? The TD to interception ratio did get better last year, but he averaged 175 passing yards a game, and so that's why I've got him at number 14. So that's Morton from Texas Tech. All right, guys, and this is going to be the final quarterback in tier 3. This is the final guy in tier 3 coming in at number 13. So kind of rounds out the bottom tier of QBs in the Big 12. And that is going to be Cincinnati quarterback Sorsby, transferring in from Indiana. So this guy, like I said, tier 3, so at the lower end of the tier, but for me felt clearly like the best of this group. Sorsby in 2022, there's no real sample size to look at. But in 2023, there's some good. There's some good. So 15 touchdowns for 5 interceptions. So a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which is actually pretty darn good. That's really good. But then we look at the other number here, and this is where it starts to get a little unimpressive. So 1,587 passing yards in 10 games where he had significant playing time. So he averaged 159 passing yards per game. And you really think about that, it's about 1.5 TDs per game, so that's solid, but 159 passing yards per game, and then you match that up with a QB rating of a 57.7, that's pretty rough. So is what it is there. I wish I could rank him higher, and there was part of me that wanted to put him higher, but I think Sorsby for Cincinnati, when you look at that 159 passing yards per game, 57.7 QBR, he's got to be in that tier 3. He's number 13 in the rankings and doesn't look to be super impressive. One of the other reasons he edged out Morton from Texas Tech is 286 rushing yards for this guy last year and 4 rushing touchdowns. So that's a little impressive, but I don't expect a ton out of Sorsby. Would I be shocked if in a new offense he thrived a little more, got a little more experimental, started slinging the rock around? No, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think judging off the year where he did get a good amount of playing time, it's hard to say he's going to be anything more than a lower end QB in the Big 12. So that's Sorsby at Cincinnati, transferring in from Indiana. All right, guys, and we are now in tier 2. So tier 2, just to refresh you guys, tier 2 is a group of quarterbacks that has shown some good talent, that has a sample size that you feel like you're getting at least a decent QB with them. So it'll be a ranging group. There's a lot of different situations in here, but you'll kind of see it. So we're going to start with Bowman from Oklahoma State. 2022, not much of a sample size there, but in 2023, he played a lot. And so the number one thing for me is the first number that stands out to not be impressed with is 15 passing touchdowns, 14 interceptions. And that's, when you look at this Oklahoma State team, that's considering that he had a really good running game to work off. And that's kind of concerning that he's got 15 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. Where with that type of play action ability, you should get some opportunities to take some clean shots down the field and have a lot of pressure taken off you to watch the run. So a 1.1 TD to interception ratio, but I think that number is probably the least impressive of anyone on this list because it is on a big sample size. So 15 touchdowns with 14 picks, pretty concerning. And then yardage wise last year, this was a great number, 3,460 yards, very good there. That was on 14 games where he had significant playing time, and that comes out to 247 yards per game. The QBR is better than the TD to INT ratio. He's got a 68.7, 24 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. And kind of why he got into tier 2 is his QBR significantly better than the tier 3 guys that actually had significant time. And then, at the TD to interception ratio is why he's the bottom of tier 2, though. It's pretty rough. Hopefully he has a better year this year. So that's Bowman from Oklahoma State, the first quarterback in tier 2 and the number 12 overall quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings. All right, guys, and this is one that I've seen a lot of mixed opinion on. This is going to be Johnson from Kansas State coming in at the number 11 ranking in the Big 12, the second quarterback in tier 2. So the thing is, there's not really any significant sample size for this guy, but in the small samples that he did get last year to come in and show what he can do, he looked awesome. Like he looked like a superstar at quarterback. Great rushing ability, great QBR. The problem is the sample size is really small. It's nothing you can really take into this year and believe that it's for sure going to happen. Now, would I lean? That's why he's in tier 2. I would lean that he's going to be an average to good Big 12 quarterback. I actually really like the kid, his potential moving forward. But I would say, considering the sample size is so small, I don't feel comfortable putting Johnson any higher. But I have him at number 11. He killed it in the bowl game last year and looks really good for the future. But for Kansas State, I think as much as you may have a superstar on your hands, he's going to need to prove it a little bit more for me before I can move him higher in the rankings. So that's the number 11 quarterback, Avery Johnson from Kansas State. All right, guys. And the number 10 quarterback in the Big 12 quarterback rankings, as we get kind of to the midway-ish point of tier two, is Donovan Smith from Houston. So Smith has a ton of sample size. He has a lot of playing. So a lot in the Big 12 as well, where he's playing a lot of Big 12 talent in these samples. So let's break it down. We'll start with 2022 for Smith. Played in 5 games where he got significant playing time. 12 to 8 TD to INT ratio, so 1.5, not great, but not terrible. 1,505 total yards. But in 5 games, that means he averaged 301 passing yards a game in 22. He did not have a good QBR of 48.7, 116 rushing yards, 7 rushing TDs. So a lot of rushing TDs, but overall, not a great performance, but some bright side in 2022. So looked like he could be something. And then in 2023, Houston, he really had a significantly better season. So he went 22 touchdowns for 13 picks, so 1.7 ratio there on 2,801 yards. So he started 12 games where he got significant playing time. So it's 233 passing yards per game, and a 62.9 QBR. So you saw a huge jump in QBR there. And then on top of that, 428 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. So on the year had over 3,000 yards and in total had about 28 touchdowns there. So I think you like what you're seeing with Smith. And my guess is that he's just as good as last year, if not better. And with that deadly rushing ability, I think he's going to be a average to above average quarterback in the Big 12. And I can see him turning some heads. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the numbers. And I think, Houston, I think a lot of people are just checking off that box, but I would not be surprised if he could lead them to, like a 6+ win season this year if he can put a good year together. So that's Donovan Smith, number 10 quarterback in the QB rankings and kind of the middle of the pack of the tier two. Okay, guys, and now we are coming up to number 9. We are still in tier two. This is the number 9 quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings. So this is going to be Dequan Finn at Baylor. We got 2 big sample sizes from this kid in 2022, playing in a G5 conference, but still some pretty impressive numbers here. 22 touchdowns, 12 picks, a 1.8 TD to INT ratio, 2,127 total passing yards. Started 12 games that year, only 177 yards per game, so not great there. 56 QBR, not great. Again, that's in the G5 too, so you'd want better. But this is 2022. It does get better. But one reason it's still impressive is 608 rushing yards that year on 8 touchdowns. So that's 50 rushing yards a game for him and almost a touchdown every game running the ball. And then he follows it up in 2023 with a very impressive year. 22 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, a 2.4 TD to INT ratio, one of the better ones we've seen so far from the quarterbacks we've listed, and 2,657 passing yards, 13 starts, so 204 passing yards a game. And the QBR jumps all the way up to a 67.3, along with 563 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. I think those are pretty impressive numbers. And before I really broke down all the stats and the data, I wasn't that familiar with this guy. And I would say after breaking him down, I'm pretty impressed. And there's a reason I had him edge out Donovan Smith, where his QBR went up quite a bit. He edged out Smith there, but he also had a real nasty running ability. So Finn at Baylor could be a big difference maker and a guy I would definitely keep an eye on, where if you're looking for a breakout QB candidate, I think Smith and Finn, but definitely Finn leaning a little more that direction. So that's the number 9 QB. And we have 2 QBs left in the tier 2, but that's the number 9 QB in the Big 12 QB rankings. Okay, guys. And like I said, we have 2 quarterbacks left in the tier 2 for the Big 12 quarterback rankings. This quarterback is the number 8 overall quarterback, so basically dead smack in the middle and the second to last in the tier 2. We've got Becht from Iowa State, Rocco Becht. Now, this guy had an impressive year last year. 23 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. That's a 2.9 ratio, 3,120 passing yards in 13 games where he got significant playing time, 240 yards per game, a 69.1 QBR on the season, 63 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He's not here because of his rushing ability. He's here because he's consistent. He's getting almost 3 touchdowns for every 1 interception he throws, and he's averaging 240 yards a game with a solid QBR at 69.1. I think he's the type of guy that's not going to win you a ton of games, but is not going to cost you any games while being helpful in winning, not being a superstar. He seems like a solid quarterback and a guy that gets the job done. There's a reason he's not in the tier 1, but he is one of my top guys in the tier 2. That's number 8, Rocco Becht from Iowa State. Okay, and now this is going to be our final quarterback in tier 2 of the Big 12 quarterback rankings. And this is going to be the number 7 quarterback in the Big 12 quarterback rankings. So I really like this kid. Just so you know, before I break it down, he kind of popped out of nowhere, right? For me, like, I didn't even know who this kid was, really, but I was shocked at how good these numbers look. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but there's some really impressive numbers in here. Let's talk about him. It's Hoover from TCU, Josh Hoover from TCU. No 2022 sample size, but he comes in 2023. He has some turnover problems, 15 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, so a 1.7 ratio. That's not super good. But what is good is he only started 7 games, and in those 7 games, he has 2,206 passing yards. That's crazy. That's the best yards per game passing out of any season of any quarterback I have listed at 315 passing yards per game. And in that 315 passing yards per game, he has a QBR of 77.1, which means he's making it happen. He's making a lot of something out of nothing and not missing the opportunities he's given. 77.1 is a super good QBR. 2 rushing touchdowns to add to icing on the cake. But Hoover's kind of one of those guys. Again, he's going to be the final guy in tier 2. The rest of the guys are all going to be tier 1. But I think it's funny. I think a lot of people aren't talking about this kid, but we saw some big flashes from him last year, and I would expect him to follow it up with, he would follow it up with an even better 2024. And if he can tone down the turnovers a bit, he could be a real deadly force for that TCU offense, and opposing Big 12 teams better keep an eye out, because I can see that kid being pretty good. So that's the final quarterback in tier 2 for the Big 12 quarterback rankings. Number 7 overall, Josh Hoover. All right, my bad, guys. There's actually one more quarterback in tier 2. Sorry about that. It is the number 6 overall quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings, and that is KJ Jefferson. Really a tale of 2 seasons over the past 2 years. In 2022, KJ Jefferson, 22 touchdowns to 4 picks. That's a 5.5 TD to INT ratio. Clearly the best of anyone we've looked at so far. 2,361 passing yards in 10 games for 236 passing yards per game. So that's pretty good too. A QBR of 77.9. Very good QBR. I believe that is the best outside of Sam Leavitt so far at Arizona State, but Leavitt was on a tiny sample size and Jefferson's was on a huge one. 510 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns in 2022 for Jefferson. So a crazy 2022 where he looks very good. But then in 2023, it's a different story. 19 touchdowns to 8 picks, only a 2.4 TD to INT ratio. That's not that bad, but not great either. On 2,107 yards, but that's in 12 games where he got significant playing time, averaging 176 passing yards per game. That's pretty bad, and follows it up with a terrible QBR of 51.8, which is really bad. That's the 3rd worst out of any quarterback in any season we've looked at so far. And he had 447 rushing yards with only 2 touchdowns. But you can kind of see the picture here with Jefferson. If he plays like he did in 2022, he's probably a tier 1 QB for me. If he plays like he did in 2023, he's, a low-end tier 2, possibly tier 3 type of guy. So you don't know exactly what you're getting, and hopefully UCF gets a great quarterback in KJ Jefferson, but you really don't know right now, and that's why he doesn't make tier 1 and is the final quarterback in tier 2. That's KJ Jefferson, number 6 overall for the Big 12 quarterback rankings at UCF. All right, guys. And now we are moving into the official tier one group. It is the top 5 quarterbacks in the Big 12. And I think it's a really close race. I'm sure you guys can imagine in your head who is in this group. You can probably just rule out the rest of them because the 5 remaining are the 5 in this group. It's a really good group. And I could see any of these QBs being better than the other QBs, depending on how the season goes. Before we dive in, guys, if you made it this far, smash the like button. Also, comment down below. Rank your quarterbacks. You can also put tiers in as well from number 16 to number 1. I want to hear what you guys think. Do it before you hear who my top 5 guys are and what order I have them in. But also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want Big 12 content or Utah Utes football content, subscribe to the channel. Let's go ahead and let's break down the tier 1 quarterbacks, the top 5 guys in the Big 12. Okay, guys, and here we go. Tier 1 is starting now. And remember, like I said, tier 1, you could really rank these guys in a lot of different orders. A lot of it is preference. But I know who I like, and I took it pretty as non-biased as I could. And we're going to start at number 5 in tier 1, 5th quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings. And that is going to be Jalon Daniels from Kansas. Jalon Daniels, I think what happened for me is I expected to have him higher, just to be honest with you guys. But as I really broke down the numbers, I didn't think it made sense to have him higher. So in 2022, he goes 13 for 2, 13 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. So a 6.5 TD to INT ratio, really good there. But then look at this number. 1,470 yards in 9 games where he got significant playing time. It's 163 yards passing per game. That's really low. Like, that's incredibly low. He did have a 90 QBR, which is one of the reasons he's in tier 1, and that's huge. And then he also had 398 yards and 6 touchdowns. But you really look at it in 9 games, it's not super impressive. It's good. The QBR is insane, but it's just not that next level you expect to see from a guy with as much hype as Jalon Daniels. And I have watched the tape. I'm really impressed with the kid. I just don't think the numbers are there in 2022. And then 2023, right? We see a bit of a different story where Daniels comes out, 5 touchdowns to 1 pick, a TD to INT ratio of 5-1, and 705 passing yards in 3 games, which is really good. For 235 passing yards per game. Maybe not really good, but that's a good passing yards per game. He also has 74 rushing yards and a QBR of 82.6. I think it's really a mixed bag with what you're getting with Jalon Daniels. I could see him being, not a top 5 guy, just being honest about it. And I could also see him being the number 1 quarterback in the conference, especially if injuries, if he can stay healthy. I could definitely see it. But I think a lot of people are running off this assumption that if Jalon Daniels is healthy, he's clearly the best guy. But I don't think the numbers are saying that. I don't think the numbers say he's clearly the best guy. I mean, in the amazing year everyone references in 2022, he's only averaging 163 passing yards per game. Now, the QBRs are really, really good. They're basically the best in the conference. But still, I think there's some more question marks, and I think there's a reason he's my number 5 guy. There's also a reason he's tier 1. He's very good, but I do think it's justified to have him at the number 5 spot in my Big 12 quarterback rankings, and that'll be the first guy in tier 1. All right, guys, and now we have the second quarterback in tier 1, and this is the number 4 overall quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings, and that is going to be Garrett Greene from West Virginia. Garrett Greene had an awesome year last year and wasn't too terrible the year before either. In 2022, he goes 5 for 3, so 5 touchdowns and 3 picks, 1.7 TD to INT ratio, so not great. 493 total yards in that season, 3 games where he got significant playing time, only 164 passing yards per game. But the reason I still think 2022 is pretty impressive is 76.9 QBR. It's a very good QBR, and 206 rushing yards on 5 touchdowns. Don't act like that's not impressive. In the 3 games where he's getting significant play, excuse me, in the 3 games where he's getting significant playing time, he's averaging almost 100 yards a game and gets almost 2 rushing touchdowns per game. I think that's a pretty impressive year on the small sample size. Then he comes out in 2023. Now, I do think, being a stickler, you can say, well, it's only 16 passing touchdowns. He has 16 touchdowns to 4 picks in 2023. But it's a ratio of 4-1, which is pretty darn good. Not a ton of touchdowns, but still a really good ratio. 2,406 total passing yards in the year. Plays significant time in 11 games. So 219 passing yards per game last year, which is pretty good. I don't think it's amazing, but also a 75.8 QBR. It's a very good QBR. And then you stack on top of that 772 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns. The kid is a playmaker. In total, he has 29 touchdowns and over 3,000 yards with a really good QBR. I think Garrett Greene, for my opinion, the PFF grade is also very good. And for my opinion, I think he's the most slept on quarterback in the Big 12. He seems like he's going to be very, very good. And looks like an awesome player. So that is my second quarterback in Tier 1, West Virginia quarterback, Garrett Greene, the number 4 overall quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings. Okay, guys, and I think this one is definitely going to surprise some people. We're going into the top 3 now, the top 3 quarterbacks in the Big 12. So the final 3 guys in Tier 1. And this is going to be Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders from Colorado, a very good quarterback. And the most impressive number you'll see here is 27 touchdowns with 3 picks. So that's a 9-1 TD to INT ratio. That's extremely good. Also, 3,230 yards in 11 games started. That's 294 passing yards per game. But I think you drop it down quite a bit when you see this number. He had a QBR of 63. I also don't have anything listed for him in 2022 because it was not FBS football, and I don't think we should be counting non-FBS football towards these numbers. And then I thought Shedeur ran the ball a lot. He only had 111 yards for 4 rushing touchdowns. That's not much. And I think some of these numbers are super impressive, like the 9-1 TD to INT. But I think the passing yards, a lot of that comes from the fact that they couldn't run the ball. And so he kind of had to throw it all the time. And then when you match that up with the 63 QBR, it becomes a little less impressive. He's still very good, one of the best quarterbacks in the country in a really probably the best overall QB conference. Maybe not the bet like the top best when you look at like just the top 3 or top 5, but you look at this conference top to bottom, there's a lot of good quarterbacks. I mean, we just broke them all down. So that's why kind of Shedeur Sanders is my number 3 guy in the Big 12 rankings. I expect him to be good. I expect him to be very good. I expect him to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. But I think the numbers, tell the story. I think he's missing opportunities he could get. They're throwing the ball a ton because they can't run the ball. And I think this year, maybe teams will have a full year of FBS film on him, and they'll be able to adjust and kind of, try to game plan a little more about what he does well and what he doesn't do well. So still a super good quarterback. I don't want you guys, I'm sure this part of the video is going to get a ton of comments, but it's not meant to be a shock jock. It really is. I looked at the numbers. I think that QBR it's just significantly worse than the 2 quarterbacks above him, and actually worse than a lot of the quarterbacks I have below him. So that's kind of where I have it. That's Shedeur Sanders, number 3 quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback ranking. Still a Tier 1 guy, still an elite quarterback in college football. Okay, so I'm sure if you've been keeping track, you know who the final 2 quarterbacks are. And this was a really tough split. Just so you guys know, this was a really tough split. There's a little bit of bias involved, but there's also some factors that I'll break down for you. So number 2 quarterback in my Big 12 rankings, and I really, just being honest, I feel like you could have number 1 and 2 as a 1A and a 1B. I think these guys are both super good and have reasons to put them 2 or 1 individually. And number 2 is Noah Fifita from Arizona. 23 touchdowns last year. No 2022 sample size, but in 2023, he had 23 touchdowns to 5 INTs, a 4.6 TD to INT ratio. That's extremely good. 2,515 total passing yards. Looked like an animal last year in 9 starts, averaged 279 passing yards per game with an 85.6 QBR. This was not a team that could not run the ball, guys. This was a team that had a stud at quarterback and wanted to throw because he was that damn good. Listen back to that, guys. A 4.6 TD to INT ratio, 279 passing yards per game, and an 85.6 QBR. I think the number one reason for me I bumped him down is only 31 rushing yards on 2 touchdowns. That's for me what kind of decided it. And I think a lot of people could have opinions that I don't think you're wrong no matter who you put in the top spot. But I think Fifita for me is number 2. It is what it is. Really good quarterback, really talented guy. And the fact that he did that as a freshman, I think he had a more impressive year than Shedeur Sanders. And this is a freshman in college that no one even knew his name a year ago. And he came out and looked like one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. And I expect him to be a nightmare in the Big 12. I think for some people following Big 12 and following Big 12 quarterback rankings that are just Big 12 fans and weren't Pac 12 fans, they might not understand just how damn dangerous Noah Fifita was last year. Guys, this is easily a number 1 or number 2 quarterback in this league. Definitely top 3, top 4 on anyone's list. This kid is nasty. He will dice up your defense if you give him an opportunity, and he is a playmaker. So that is my number 2 quarterback in my Big 12 quarterback rankings. And, now we'll go ahead and break down number 1. All right, guys. And I'm a bit of a homer, but I do think the numbers justify the choice. The number 1 quarterback in the Big 12 and the number 1 guy in the Tier 1 is going to be Cam Wham Bam. Thank you, ma'am. Rising. 26 touchdowns to 8 picks, a 3.3 TD to INT. Not quite as impressive as the 2 guys I have lower than him. I agree, but still very good number at 3.3 TD to INT ratio. 3,034 total passing yards on the year. And this is in 2022. I should preface that. He was injured all of 2023, and I could see some people making a case of why he should be lower because of that. I understand that, but I do think it's not like we're going into the next year. We're talking about a guy that's had damn near 2 years off of football to completely rehab. If he's not fully rehabbed at this point, I don't know when he will be, right? Could it take him a couple games to get there? Yeah, but it's hard to factor the injury in too much when you're 2 years out. I mean, maybe not 2 years out, but over a year and a half out when he hits the field. So, again, I just think the total yards really impressive. And that's in 12 starts. So he averaged 253 passing yards per game. Then he had an 83.1 QBR with 465 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. And that final number, I actually think overall the passing numbers for Fifita in 23 are slightly more impressive than the passing numbers for Rising in 22, especially when you consider that Fifita only had a smaller sample size. But I do think for Rising, that rushing ability, he had really Fifita wasn't rushing much, where Rising was a big factor running the ball. So I had to edge it out there, and I gave it to Rising. But that's kind of the justification why Rising's number 1. But a superstar quarterback and a guy that I believe is not getting enough attention as at least in the conversation of the number 1 quarterback in the Big 12. And I really, seriously, I really mean this. I think any of these 3 guys I mentioned in the top 3, you could put in any order. I depending on your preference. For me, there's a clear 2, like there's a 1A, 1B, and a 2. And that's Cam Rising, Noah Fifita, and then at 2, I have Shedeur Sanders. And I'm trying to be super transparent about that. I don't know if Shedeur Sanders, how do you have a 63 QBR and you're going to be the number 1 pick in the draft? I guess we'll kind of see. But I have Cam Rising as the number 1 quarterback heading into this season for the Big 12. All right, guys. So that was the Big 12 quarterback rankings. Let's go ahead and recap it. Retzlaff from BYU is the number 16, and this is tier 3. So the first guy in tier 3 and number 16 is Retzlaff. Leavitt at Arizona State is number 15. And then we have Morton at Texas Tech is number 14. And we have Sorsby at Cincinnati as number 13. And that is tier 3, kind of the guys that I feel like will be the clear low end of the Big 12. And then we have tier 2, which is guys that could pop and could not pop. Looks like the tier 2 looks like a good group. We'll start with number 12 in Alan Bowman at Oklahoma State. Then we have at number 11, Avery Johnson at Kansas State. At number 10, we have Donovan Smith at Houston. Number 9, we have Dequan Finn at Baylor. Number 8, we have Rocco Becht from Iowa State. Number 7, we have Josh Hoover at TCU. And then number 6, the final quarterback in the tier 2 rankings, we have KJ Jefferson from UCF. In tier 1, the top 5, we have Jalon Daniels at 5. We have Garrett Greene at 4. We have Shedeur Sanders at 3, Noah Fifita at 2, and Cam Rising as the number 1 quarterback. Those are my rankings. Feel free to disagree. At least give the video a like, even if you hate my rankings. If you lasted this long, you should like the video. I put a lot of time into it. I had to pull all these stats. I had to kind of do the edits and then do this whole damn video breaking it all down. So I enjoyed making it. And if you enjoyed watching it, whether you agree or not, smash the like button. Also, seriously, if you made it this far and you haven't already commented your personal 16 that you would rank, please do. I'd love to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. We put out we do this Big 12 breakdown every week, ton of Utah Utes football content. And especially if your team's going to be playing Utah this year, you might as well, subscribe to the channel and you can see the breakdown. I do a breakdown before every game, pretty detailed, pretty intense. So if you're into that, make sure you stick around. All right, I'm out of here, guys. That's the Big 12 breakdown, Big 12 quarterback rankings. I want to hear what you guys think. I'm out of here. Go Utes. Go Big 12.